Well, good leadership is a rare commodity. An outstanding leadership is the stuff of legends. Now, I have this book at home called The Endurance. And I don't know if you've read anything about this particular incident in history, but this is an account of the remarkable Antarctic expedition that was, the plan was to cross Antarctica, to plant the Union flag in it and to claim it for Britain. That was the plan. But the boat, the ship that they sailed on, the Endurance, became stuck in the ice floes. And eventually it was trapped and crushed by the ice. And the men had to abandon ship onto the ice. And they lived on the ice for 170 days. And it was 497 days between when they left Britain, or they left land, and they next returned to land. It is a stunning adventure. But what emerges from the adventure is the leadership of Ernest Shackleton. We see him selecting the individuals for the adventure, for the expedition. We see him moulding them into a team, and it was that team spirit that was going to see them through the difficulties that they were going to face. We see him being decisive. We see him making difficult decisions. We see him leading by example. One of the most impressive things was when they left the ship and they went onto the pack ice. They said that they must leave the pack ice and they must cross the pack ice to get to open water. And to do so, they must get rid of everything that was superfluous. So he reached in his pocket and he threw away his golden sovereigns. Now that's leadership. And when he gets to the end, he writes, "Not a man was lost." That's successful leadership. It was leadership with outstanding qualities. And that is what we have here in Nehemiah. Outstanding quality leadership. I want us to consider something of the leadership of Nehemiah this morning. The first thing we see is Nehemiah assessing the work. Assessing the work. In chapter 2, we see that after months of praying and planning and travelling, he arrived at Jerusalem, there in verse 11. "So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days." Now, Nehemiah arrived in style. And that was noticed by his enemies. They were not happy. Someone was coming to seek the good of the people of God. But his arrival seemed to have been completely ignored by the people of God. It didn't seem to register with them that this man had come, he'd come 500 miles, whatever the distance was. It was a huge distance he'd come in order to lead the people of God. But in fact, he was quite happy that he wasn't the focus of attention. He kept his plans to himself. He kept them close to his chest. He was quite tight-lipped about the reason why he'd arrived. He was not a romantic, but he decided that at the beginning he needed to see for himself what the situation was. He needed to know just how bad things really were. So what does he do? Well, he sets about a night expedition. It feels a bit cloak and dagger. There were no streetlights, so he had to wait 3 days, it seems, until there was a good clear moonlit night when he could go outside with his servants and they could assess the walls of Jerusalem. He leaves, it tells us, by the valley gate, which was in the southwest corner. And then he goes round the wall in an anti-clockwise direction, so down towards the south and then up the eastern side. And as he goes, he realizes that Hananiah's report that he's received back in verse 2 of chapter 1, Hananiah's report was not an exaggeration. In fact, the words that he uses are almost identical to the words that Hananiah has given. He viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. But as he proceeds round the wall, he gets to the fountain gate. And when he arrives at the fountain gate, the conditions were so bad that the horse or the ass or whatever it was he was riding wasn't able to go any further. It was just rubble everywhere. Nowhere for a horse to go. So he has to dismount. He gets off his horse and he carries on his journey assessing, clambering over the mountains of rubble that were once the walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah wanted to know the worst, and he was willing to put himself out and to go without sleep to find out just how bad things really were. Leadership begins with an accurate assessment of reality. That was Nehemiah. That's how he began in this phase. Now, if we would do a work for good, we need to know what needs to be done. And there are times when we look out on the church as it is in our day, and it's pretty depressing. But if we want the church to be rebuilt, we actually have to assess just how bad the church really is and not turn away from what we see. You see, it's no good just throwing ourselves into things. And it's no good pretending that things are better than they are. That's not going to help us. You know, we're a relatively small congregation. But there are many congregations in exactly the same place as we are. In fact, only this week, I heard of another evangelical congregation that's closed its doors. There are congregations who are on the verge of extinction. And those that still open, evangelical churches, many of them have resorted to worldly thinking. They believe the answer to the problem is actually to become more like the world. And the pursuit of godliness and holiness and communion with God, well, that's almost been abandoned. That's almost kind of, well, that's so archaic. It just seems wrong in our modern thinking. And those churches that are surviving with a degree of integrity, well, many of them are dogged by deep theological inconsistencies. The church is in ruins. in Britain. There is little left that has any credibility. The glory has departed. Now, this situation that we face, and we must be honest about it, this situation requires outstanding leadership. We need men of courage, men of God. So the first thing is assessing the work. That's what a good leader does, assesses the work. Next thing, recruiting the workers. If the situation on the ground was bad, the situation among the people was worse. The people themselves seemed to be in a very low state. There was no excitement about the arrival of Nehemiah. There was no inquiry about, well, who is this guy? Where's he come from? Why is he here? It seems as if the people have this malaise. Maybe they've become accustomed to the plight that they're in. And because it's their day-to-day experience, well, they become indifferent to the plight that they're in. The fact that the wall is broken down, the fact that the gates are burned with fire, well, it doesn't affect them anymore. It's almost as if they don't even notice it anymore. They seem completely unconcerned by what's going on, by their own condition. Maybe part of that is that they were living there in survival mode, and all that they needed to do was to survive. Now, sometimes that thinking affects us. We can continue in our congregations being accustomed to our plight and become disengaged from the reality of our plight. And for some of us, it's the only way to continue, because if we really understood our plight and really were burdened by it, well, it would drain us. And so in order to avoid being drained by our plight, well, we enter survival mode, where, well, as long as we survive to get to heaven, that's good enough. Well, what does Nehemiah do in this scenario? Well, he, after having viewed the scenario outside and looked at the walls, the one thing he doesn't do is despair. He knows that he is in the centre of God's purpose. He knows why he's there. He knows that God has placed him there. He knows that God has opened up the opportunity for him to be there. He knows he's God's man. He's been called by God for this work. And therefore he sets about recruiting and encouraging the people in front of him to join him in the work. After his fact-finding, he calls the people together and he addresses them in verses 17 and 18 of chapter 2. Now, his approach to them is actually very interesting, and there's much we can learn from it. In one sense, his approach is very pointed. He says, "Ye see the distress that we are in." He doesn't seek to cover it up. He doesn't seek to sugarcoat it. He just gives the facts. We can all see it. We're in distress. But notice that he is actually very personal about it. He doesn't sort of stand up back and say, "You are in distress. you're in a bit of a plight, you're in a bit of a pickle. He doesn't say that. He identifies himself, he aligns himself fully. Ye see the distress that we are in. I'm in this as well with you. But then he invited them, he encouraged them to build. What does he say? You see the distress that we are in, and he explains that. He says, come, let us build up the walls of Jerusalem. Now, he doesn't come to them and condemn them. He doesn't come to them and say, you start working over there, you start working over there. He doesn't start throwing his weight around and telling people what to do. He doesn't dictate to them. He doesn't manipulate them. Now, clearly he does have authority from the king. But he urges them to join him in this venture. We need to rebuild, he says. We need to put right what is wrong. But notice how he motivates them. Because this is we hear a lot of talk about motivational speeches. And people quite often ask, well, what did the manager say at half time? Because the team seemed to come out completely different in the second half. That must have been a motivational speech. Well, what does Nehemiah do? What does he say to motivate them? Well, there are three things he says to them. First of all, he gives them a purpose as to why they should rebuild. That we be no more a reproach. He said, look, this is a shame. This is a disgrace that we're in this condition. Not just a shame for ourselves, but for the name and reputation of God. This doesn't look good on God, he's saying. And he feels this very keenly. He says it several times. This doesn't look good for God. But then he says, but God is with us. The hand of God is in this. God has not abandoned us to the shame of this condition. He lifts their view towards God. He says, I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me. I testified as to how God had led me, how God had helped me, how I know that the blessing of God is with me, how that God is approving of the plan. God is in it. God is with us. Now, if ever there was an encouragement that should bring a smile to a believer's face, it's this. God is with us. God is with us. But what's the proof that God was with them? Was there anything tangible? Yes, he says. And also the king's word that he had spoken to me. The king's word. The king has changed his policy. I have a commission from the king. Now, in a sense, his words are a kind of very veiled and very well covered implied rebuke. Why haven't you been building? But actually, he comes across with such graciousness. He is so tender in his address to them. He says, come on, let's build. God is with us. And the king has commissioned me. God calls us to build. That's what he calls us to do. And the church in our day has become deeply neglected. We seem to have lost our incentive, we seem to have lost our way, and we are exhausted in making no progress. Our focus is purely survival. survival. Now, what does Paul say in Corinthians? For we are labourers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building, according to the grace of God which is given unto me. As a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereon. For other foundation can no man lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build on this foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, etc. What is he saying? He's saying, here is the foundation. Jesus Christ. And I'm expecting you to build on this foundation. That's what I'm expecting you to do. You see, God encourages us and expects us to build. And God is with us in our building. What does Paul say? We are labourers together with God. God's here with us, standing with us in building. We are building with him and for him. And if we want to recruit workers to join us in building, we need to recruit them in the same way that Nehemiah did. We need to motivate them in the same way that Nehemiah did. They need to share a sense of the shame. They need to see the evident hand of God on us. And they need to have an indication that God is backing us. This is wise leadership from Nehemiah. Now, what's the effect? What's the effect of his invitation and his encouragement to the people? Well, we need to see thirdly and lastly, doing the work. So we've seen assessing the work, recruiting the workers. Now we need to see doing the work. How did they respond? Well, they seem to have responded almost as one man. It's there in verse 18. They said, let us rise up and build. That's it. It's almost as if they shouted in unison, yes, let's rise up and build. Now, there's probably nothing more thrilling to a leader of the people of God than the people that he's leading to say, yes, let's go for it. Let's rise up and build. But it was not just words. There's action here. There's determination, there's steadfastness, there's preparation of stone and timber, and they threw themselves into this work. I mean, after all, who knew when the king might change his mind and the window of opportunity would be gone? We must build now. And with their concerted effort, they made rapid and astonishing progress. Chapter 6 tells us that in 52 days, a complete circuit of the wall was joined together. They had more to go upwards. But within 52 days, what's that? That's less than 2 months. I mean, that is staggering. They did more in that period than had happened for years. It was phenomenal. Well, who did what? Well, chapter 3 tells us who did what. Chapter 3 is a map of personnel moving around the wall saying who built in each little bit of the wall. It begins in the northeast corner with the sheep gate, and it moves anti-clockwise around the wall. Who built? Well, who took the lead? Verse 1. The high priest. Amazing. The high priest took a lead. Eliashib. And with him, the priests. They're recorded in verse 1. They're recorded in verses 22 and 28. The priests, they're about the work. And verse 17 tells us the Levites, they were about the work. The ministers of God were at the forefront in this work. Yes, they had their own shortcomings. We're going to discover them as we carry on through the book. But they stepped out, to put it right. And Eliashib, the high priest, was foremost in doing that. It was not beneath him to roll up his hands, roll up his sleeves, and get his hands dirty in building a wall. Who else did some building? Well, other cities. I don't know how many cities you recognise as we read through the passage. Jericho, Tekoa, Gibeon, Mizpah, Zanoah, Beth Hakkaran, Beth Zur, Keilah. There are probably others. There's just a few of them. So here are people who lived in other cities who said, oh, there's a work going on there. Let's join them and let's help them in that. Even though there is nothing in it for us. They're not motivated by self-interest, but they got stuck in to help. Now that's interesting. It means two things. It means that if we see other people in need, it's not a shameful thing to dive in and help them. But also it means if we're in need, we mustn't be too proud to receive help from other people outside who can see the need and want to help us in it. But in this list, there are some very unlikely labourers. I don't know if you noticed it as we were reading through it. Goldsmiths, apothecaries, that's people who make perfumes and medicines, merchants. They're very odd builders. I mean, who would have thought somebody who's looking down a glass, you know, to mount a precious stone and a piece of gold will be out there mucking in, carrying hods of stone and building the wall? Who would have thought somebody who was used to grinding up spices and herbs and oils to make ointments and perfumes will be out there mixing up concrete? Who would have thought that somebody who spent all his time exchanging and trading in money, or whatever it was he was selling as a merchant, he'd abandon that? There was something more pressing. Building the wall, putting up the bars and the wall, and the doors and the locks and the bolts. Heavy duty stuff was done by people who were not used to doing it. Amazing. These were people motivated by God. Who else was involved? Well, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Several times in this list it tells us he built nearest his house. He built nearest his house. He built nearest his house. They went outside the front door. Oh, look, the wall's broken down. Come on, let's start building. Straight outside the front door. That's it. The inhabitants of Jerusalem. But there's another note, there's another theme in here. Families. Families built. It talks in verse 18 about the brethren. Maybe there was a family of guys and they said, right, come on boys, let's get into this. And they start building. But verse 12 tells us something even more surprising. Shallum, it says here, next unto him repaired Shallum, the son of Halohesh, the ruler of half part of Jerusalem, he and his daughters. Hold on a minute. They stop polishing their nails, doing their hair, and they're out there carrying the stones and the concrete, whatever it was they used to hold it all together. The daughters, remarkable. They're in there with the manual labour. Now what's interesting too, as you read through it, and I hope you noticed it as we read, was there are several groups that did multiple sections. They did more than one piece. Ezer, for example, in verse 19. Next unto him repaired Ezer, the son of Jeshua, the ruler of Mizpah, another piece over against the going up to the armoury. Another piece, another piece. There's several people that said another piece. What's happening here? Well, they finished their bit. They said, I've done my bit. There's another bit over there. Let's do that bit. We've got people here who are enthusiastic about the work. They want it to be done. They can see something else that needs doing and they get on and do it. The picture that we have in chapter 3 is a diverse group of people from every walk of life, from every strata of society, people that had means, people that had no means, but they had one thing, a shared vision. They were labouring for the cause of God and the people of God. Now what does this tell us? In closing, a few things. It tells us that every Christian has a contribution to make to the work of the Lord. In 1 Corinthians, Paul confronts us with the idea that the church is a body, and the body is composed of different organs. There are different parts that have different abilities, different gifts and different functions. The church should function like that, and we all have a place in it. The problem is that we tend to elevate some functions above others in our minds. So we think, I can't preach, I'm of no use. No, maybe you can't preach, but that doesn't mean you're no use. There is still a work that you can do and you should do for Christ and his people. You can pray. That's how Nehemiah began. You can talk. You can phone people. You can listen. You can sing the praises of God. And you can support the leader that God has given you. These are all things, and many others, that we can do. Think about a body. What's a body got? It's got eyes and ears and nose. It's got all of those things, all those functions, some of them that we don't even think about or see. But God has a function for you as a believer in his church. Next, progress is most effective and most rapid when God's people work together. Now there is a recurring phrase in chapter 3. Next unto him. Next unto him. Next unto him. What's that mean? Everyone's building their own section or their own gate. But their bit had to dovetail with the bit that was being built next door. The section being built by somebody else. It would have been no good if they said, I can't get on with him. It would be no good if they said, I can't work with him, I'm not speaking to him. I wouldn't be seen dead with him. What? Anyway, why did he get to build that bit? I wanted to build that bit. Can you imagine the mayhem? You just have a bit of a wall here and then a gap and then another bit of a... That's not a wall. No, petty rivalries are deeply damaging to the work of God. They are. they must be put aside if the work of God is going to be rebuilt. Psalm 133 is so helpful. How good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. God is pleased to work. God is pleased to send down his blessing when God's people are working together. They're pulling in the same direction. There's a very interesting piece in Whitfield's journals. His first trip to Cardiff, his first trip to Wales, he concludes with these statements in his journal. Blessed be God, there seems to be a noble spirit gone out into Wales, and I believe ere long there will be more visible fruits of it. What inclines me strongly to think so is that the partition wall of bigotry and party zeal is broken down, and ministers and teachers of different communions join with one heart and one mind to carry on the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Lord, make all the Christian world thus minded, for till this is done, I fear, we must despair of any great reformation in the Church of God. If only the Church of Wales in our day was like it was in Whitfield's, there would be much more hope for us. Next, we must learn not to be afraid to ask for help when the task is beyond us. There are times when we think, you know what, this is a bit too big for me. And the problem is we like to manage everything ourselves. We're quite into micromanagement. We like to have our fingers in everything. No, I'm the same. I must admit, I'm like that. But there's no shame in asking for help. And if help is needed, we must ask. But there's something else here. We must learn to start building and repairing in closest proximity to ourselves. We must repair our own wall first, before we start repairing somebody else's. We must put our own walk with Christ right first, before we try to put somebody else's right. You know, maybe there were some jobs that you used to do for Christ, and you're not doing them anymore. Maybe you need to start doing them again. Maybe there are some jobs that you started and they've kind of fallen off your agenda. You need to put them back on. Do all for Christ and do it for him as if he has personally asked you to do it. Nehemiah's words are a great motto, and maybe a motto that we need to write over our lives and over our churches. Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem. Let's take a lead from Nehemiah. No. Let's take a lead from Jesus. He is the master builder. And he is building his church. And he calls you and I to join him. Come, he says, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem. Come on, let's join him. Let's join Jesus in building his church. Amen. we shall sing in closing hymn number 353. 353, Lord, from whom all blessings flow, perfecting the church below. Steadfast may we cleave to thee, love, the mystic union be. 353.
Lord, from whom all blessings flow, perfecting the church below. Steadfast may we cleave to thee, love the mystic union be. Join our faithful spirits, join each to each and all to thine. Lead us through the paths of peace, on to perfect holiness. Move and actuate and guide, diverse gifts to each divide. Placed according to thy will, let us all our work fulfill. Never from our office move, needful to each other prove. Use the grace on each bestowed, tempered by the art of God. Sweetly may we all agree, touched with softest sympathy. There is neither want nor free, great nor serve our Lord in thee. Love like death hath all destroyed, rendered all distinctions void. Names and sects and parties fall, thou, Christ, art all in all. Now the God of peace, that brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, that great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant, make you perfect in every good work to do his will, working in you that which is well pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.